The master alarm in the cockpit of the Venture did not chirp. It screamed. A continuous, high-pitched whine signaled a breach in the primary coolant loop. Sylvan Mercer did not panic. Panic was an expensive luxury that orbital salvage contractors could not afford. He jammed his thumb onto the override button. He felt the deck plates vibrate as the emergency baffles slammed shut. The silence that followed was worse than the alarm. It meant the pumps had died. "Benton, talk to me," Sylvan said. He adjusted his headset. His voice remained flat, controlled. In the engineering crawlspace, Benton Harrow grunted. The sound came through the comms, accompanied by the rhythmic metallic clanging of a heavy wrench. Benton was a man of 60 years. 40 of those years had been spent fixing things that the vacuum of space tried to break. "The secondary line is holding. For now," Benton's voice crackled. "The Drajal fleet just pulsed their gravity anchors again. They are moving the entire debris field. It is like trying to weld inside a washing machine filled with ball bearings." Sylvan looked out the reinforced polymer viewport. High Earth orbit was no longer a graveyard. It was a blender. 3 massive Drajal cruisers hung in the blackness. They were monolithic slabs of matte black alloy. Each one was 4 miles long. They did not use thrusters. They used localized gravity wells to warp space. To the Drajul, Earth was a resource node. To the Drajul, the 60,000 tons of orbital junk surrounding the planet was just dust. But that dust was moving at 17,000 miles per hour. "They are ignoring our hails," Sylvan said. He watched a radar blip. It was a dead weather satellite from the 1990s. It was tumbling toward them. Nysa Gray called from the ground station. She said the Drajal commander refused to acknowledge the salvage rights. She made it clear they consider anything in orbit to be unclaimed refuse. "Refuse," Benton spat. The clanging stopped. "This refuse is going to punch a hole through their shiny hulls if they keep shifting the vectors. They do not understand orbital mechanics. They think their shields can tank a kinetic impact from a 3-ton lead-acid battery bank." Sylvan checked the thermal sensors. The Venture was a 30-year-old tug. It was built for towing derelict hulls, not dodging hypervelocity scrap. "We have a problem, Benton. Look at the long-range scan. That Drajal scout ship, the one hovering over the North Atlantic. It is sitting right in the path of the Kessler Cascade they just started." "Let it hit them," Benton replied. "Maybe it will wake them up." "If it hits them, the impact will shatter the scout. That creates 10 million more pieces of shrapnel. It starts a chain reaction. We lose every functional satellite left in LEO. No GPS, no comms, no weather tracking for the guys back home. We go back to the 19th century in 45 minutes. Sylvan gripped the flight sticks. His knuckles were white. He was not a soldier. He was a mechanic with a pilot's license. He looked at the debris field. To the Drajal, it was a mess. To Sylvan, it was a map. He knew every piece of junk up here. He knew the drag coefficients. He knew the mass of the old Soviet boosters and the spent American fuel tanks. "Benton, get to the EVA bay. We are not salvaged today." "What are we?" Benton asked. "We are a rudder," Sylvan said. "We are going to grab that old Vanguard booster, the one with the solid fuel remnant. We are going to use it as a kinetic interceptor." "That is a 2-man job on the exterior hull, Sylvan. The radiation from the Drajal drives is spiking." "Then move fast," Sylvan said. Sylvan fired the RCS thrusters. The Venture groaned. The ship was a collection of scars and welds. It smelled of recycled oxygen and stale coffee. He pivoted the tug. On the screen, the Vanguard booster appeared. It was a cylinder of rusted steel and frozen chemicals. It had been orbiting the Earth for 55 years. It was a ghost. He brought the tug within 20 meters. The Drajal scout ship was visible in the distance. It was a needle of silver light. It looked elegant, It looked arrogant. It was completely unaware that a piece of 1960s engineering was about to become a localized extinction event for its crew. "I am out," Benton's voice came through. "The tether is locked. I am moving to the booster." Sylvan watched the external camera. Benton looked like a small white insect against the blackness. He was carrying a portable plasma welder and a magnetic grappling line. The debris field hissed past them. A frozen bolt struck the Venture's hull. It sounded like a gunshot. "Watch your six, Benton. We have a cloud of paint chips coming through in 30 seconds. They will shred your suit." "I see them," Benton said. He was moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who respected physics. "I am at the booster, setting the mag locks now. Sylvan, this thing is heavier than the spec said. The fuel has crystallized. It is a solid block of propellant." "That is better," Sylvan said. "More mass, more momentum." Sylvan checked the Drajul Scout again. It was lowering its altitude. It was moving deeper into the junk. The Drajul did not care about the trash because they believed their energy shields were absolute. They did not understand that at 17,000 miles per hour, a piece of trash was not an object. It was a bullet. "Locks are green," Benton reported. His breathing was heavy in the comms. "But the stabilizer fins are sheared off. If we push this thing, it is going to tumble. We will never hit the target vector." "I am coming out to help," Sylvan said. "Negative," Benton replied. "Someone has to stay at the helm to pulse the thrusters. If the Venture drifts, I am a smear on the stars. Send the drone." Sylvan hesitated. The drone was a piece of junk itself, a modified repair unit with a weak battery. He toggled the release. The drone, nicknamed the Brick, drifted out of the bay. "The Brick is away," Sylvan said. "Benton, the Drajul just fired a tractor beam. They are trying to clear a path. They are pulling a cluster of old communication satellites right into our path." "How long?" Benton asked. 2 minutes. If we do not move this booster now, we are going to get crushed by 100 tons of high-speed silicon." Sylvan watched the telemetry. The Drajul tractor beam was a shimmering blue distortion in the vacuum. It was powerful. It was crude. It was moving the junk without any regard for the orbital harmonics. It was like a giant clearing a path through a forest by knocking over all the trees. "Benton, weld it. Now." The flare of the plasma welder lit up the cockpit. Sylvan felt the heat through the cameras. Benton was fusing the drone's chassis directly to the booster's hull. It was a desperate, ugly repair. It was pure blue-collar engineering. "Done," Benton panted. "Get us out of here, Sylvan. Push it." Sylvan slammed the throttles forward. The Venture's engines roared. The grappling cables snapped taut. The tug strained against the mass of the old booster. For a second, nothing happened. The two ships were locked in a tug-of-war with inertia. Then the booster moved. It was a slow, agonizing shift. The Venture's hull screamed as the stress points reached their limit. Sylvan ignored the warning lights. He watched the vector line on his HUD. The booster was swinging around. It was heading toward the gap in the Drajul's path. "Vector locked," Sylvan said. "Benton, get back inside, now!" "The cable is jammed!" Benton yelled. "The maglock fused to the booster's skin. I can't release it." Sylvan looked at the radar. The Drajul tractor beam was seconds away from sweeping through their position. If the Venture was still attached to the booster when the beam hit, they would be dragged into the meat grinder along with the junk. "Benton, use the emergency cut." "The charge failed. The battery is dead." Sylvan didn't think. He grabbed a manual override tool from under his seat. He didn't have time for a suit. He didn't have time for a tether. He slammed the airlock cycle. "Sylvan, what are you doing?" Benton's voice was frantic. Sylvan didn't answer. He stepped into the airlock. He had 45 seconds of oxygen in his lungs. He had one chance to hit the manual release on the exterior hull. He looked out the small window. The blue light of the Drajul beam was already reflecting off the Venture's nose. The universe was a problem. Sylvan Mercer was the tool. The inner airlock door hissed shut. The sound was a sharp, final mechanical thud that vibrated through the soles of Sylvan's boots. He stood in the cramped metallic transition chamber. It smelled of stale ozone and recycled sweat. He did not have a pressure suit. He was wearing his standard-issue canvas flight coveralls and a pair of reinforced work gloves. Sylvan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He took a deep, final breath. He filled his lungs until they burned. He knew the physics. He had 35 seconds before the lack of pressure caused the nitrogen in his blood to bubble. He had 45 seconds before his heart would stop. He gripped the manual override lever. It was a cold, unyielding piece of solid steel. He pulled. The outer door did not open. It exploded outward as the remaining atmosphere screamed into the void. The sound was a momentary roar that vanished into an absolute, suffocating silence. Sylvan felt the sudden drop in temperature. It was not the biting cold of a winter morning. It was the total absence of heat. It pulled the warmth from his skin like a predator. He stepped out onto the exterior hull of the Venture. His magnetic boots clacked against the hull plates. He could not hear the sound, but he felt the vibration in his teeth. The universe was a silent, high-contrast nightmare. Above him, the Dragil cruiser was a wall of matte black geometry that blotted out half the stars. Below him, the Earth was a curved horizon of glowing blue and swirling white. The blue light of the Dragil tractor beam was everywhere. It was a shimmering, translucent curtain of energy that distorted the space around it. It looked like heat haze on a desert road. Sylvan saw the cable. It was a thick, braided line of carbon nanotube fiber. It was pulled taut as a piano wire. At the end of the cable, the massive booster rocket was a dead weight. The mag lock was fused. A glob of molten slag from the earlier welding attempt had cooled and hardened over the release pins. Benton was visible 20 feet away. He was tethered to the booster, his heavy engineering suit looking like a bloated insect. Benton was waving his arms. He was pointing at the mag lock. Sylvan could see Benton's lips moving behind the gold-tinted visor, but there was no sound. The comms were dead in the interference of the tractor beam. Sylvan moved. Every motion was slow, deliberate. He reached the primary hitch. The blue light of the Dragil beam was closer now. It hit a cluster of old weather satellites a mile away. The satellites did not explode. They were simply crushed. The gravity shear folded the aluminum frames like they were made of wet paper. Sylvan raised the manual override tool. It was a heavy 3-foot pry bar made of tungsten carbide. He jammed the tip of the bar into the gap between the mag lock and the booster's docking ring. His lungs began to ache. The urge to exhale was a physical weight in his chest. He ignored it. He focused on the metal. He leaned his entire body weight against the bar. The slag did not move. It was cold welded to the hull. Sylvan looked up. The Dragil beam was 500 yards away. The Venture began to groan. He felt the vibration through his boots. The entire ship was being pulled toward the gravity well. The deck plates were warping. A seam on the outer hull began to buckle. He shifted his grip. He needed more leverage. He found a recessed bolt head and braced his foot against it. He swung the pry bar with everything he had. The slag cracked. It was a tiny, jagged line in the gray metal. Sylvan didn't wait. He struck it again. And again. He was losing his vision. The edges of his sight were turning gray. His brain was screaming for oxygen. He felt the capillaries in his eyes beginning to pop. On the fourth strike, the slag shattered into 1,000 tiny diamonds that drifted away into the black. The mag lock hissed. The internal springs under thousands of pounds of pressure finally engaged. The cable snapped back toward the Venture like a whip. The booster rocket drifted free. Sylvan did not watch it go. He turned. He ran. His boots clattered in a rhythmic, silent beat against the hull. He reached the airlock. He tumbled inside. He didn't use the lever. He slammed his fist into the emergency cycle button. The outer door slid shut. The hiss of incoming air was the most beautiful sound Sylvan had ever heard. It was a violent, turbulent rush of nitrogen and oxygen. He collapsed onto the floor plates. He coughed until he vomited. His lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. "Sylvan, Sylvan, talk to me." The voice came through the internal speakers. It was Benton. He sounded like he was shouting from the bottom of a well. Sylvan rolled onto his back. He stared at the flickering overhead light. He took a ragged breath. "I am in," Sylvan wheezed. "Benton, get to the secondary airlock. The beam is hitting." The Venture lurched. It was not a gentle movement. It was a violent, bone-shaking yank. The ship tilted 45 degrees. Sylvan slid across the floor of the airlock and slammed into the bulkhead. In the cockpit, the master alarm returned. It was a low-frequency rumble that Sylvan felt in his marrow. The Drajul tractor beam had snagged the tail end of the Venture. "I am inside!" Benton yelled over the comms. "Seal is green! Sylvan, the engines are redlining. The gravity shear is tearing the mounting bolts out of the frame." Sylvan scrambled to his feet. He ignored the blood trickling from his nose. He burst through the inner door and ran for the cockpit. He jumped into the pilot's seat and grabbed the controls. The HUD was a sea of red warnings. The Drajul cruiser was now directly overhead. It was so close he could see the individual plates of its armor. They were etched with strange, geometric patterns that seemed to shift as the gravity well pulsed. "They are not just clearing a path," Sylvan said. He adjusted the thrust vector. "Look at the telemetry, Benton." On the secondary screen, a map of the debris field was being updated in real time. The Drajul beams were not pushing the junk out of the way. They were herding it. Thousands of tons of old boosters, dead satellites, and titanium shards were being compressed into a tight, spinning disk. "They are making a shotgun," Benton said. His voice was low. "They are using the orbital junk as kinetic ammunition." Sylvan watched as the Drajul cruiser tilted its nose. It was aiming the disk of debris toward a point in low Earth orbit. "They are aiming at the Geneva station," Sylvan said. "There are 12,000 people on that ring." "We cannot stop them, Sylvan," Benton replied. "We are a tugboat. We have a broken coolant loop and half a tank of fuel." Sylvan looked at the old booster rocket they had just released. It was drifting a mile away. It was a massive hollow cylinder of high-grade steel. "We do not have to stop them," Sylvan said. He wiped the blood from his lip. "We just have to change the math. Benton, how much fuel is left in that old Saturn booster we were towing?" "It is a spent stage, Sylvan. It is empty." "The primary tanks are empty," Sylvan corrected, "but the maneuvering thrusters use hypergolic foam. If we can trigger a sympathetic detonation inside that debris disk." "You want to turn our salvage into a bomb?" "I want to turn it into a leaf blower," Sylvan said. "If we disrupt the focal point of their gravity well, the debris will scatter. It will miss the station." "Sylvan, that booster is inside the beam's kill zone. If we go back in there, the Venture will be torn apart." Sylvan gripped the throttles. He felt the ship vibrate. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse. It was the sound of a machine that was being pushed too far. "The universe is a problem, Benton," Sylvan said. "Start the override on the safety limiters. We are going back in." Sylvan's hand hovered over the primary thruster toggle. The Venture was a 30-year-old workhorse. It was designed to haul dead weight at steady speeds. It was never meant to dance in a high-gravity shear. He felt the ship buck under him. The vibration traveled from the deck plates through his boots and up his spine. It was a jagged, uneven rhythm. "Benton, I need those limiters dead," Now, Sylvan said. He kept his voice low. He did not want to waste breath. I am working on it, Sylvan. These breakers are seized. I am using the heavy pry bar. Benton's voice came through the headset. It was punctuated by the sound of metal grinding against metal. The Drajul pulse is ionizing the air back here. I can smell the ozone. It is thick enough to chew. Sylvan watched the telemetry. The Drajul cruiser, a monolithic slab of dark geometry, remained indifferent to their presence. To the aliens, the venture was likely no more than a stray piece of dust. The debris disk was tightening. Sylvan saw a discarded Soviet-era rocket casing get sucked into the vortex. It collided with a cluster of dead communication satellites. The impact did not cause an explosion. The gravity was so intense that the objects simply fused together. They became a single jagged mass of compressed alloy. They are reaching critical density, Sylvan muttered. If that disk hits the atmosphere at 20,000 miles per hour, it will not just destroy the station. It will create a firestorm over half of Europe. He pushed the throttles forward. The Venture's main engines roared. The sound was a deep, guttural bass that shook the cockpit glass. The ship fought the invisible pull of the Drajul beam. It felt like driving a truck through deep mud, while a gale-force wind tried to push it off a cliff. "Limiters are bypassed," Benton shouted, "but the reactor is redlining. You have maybe 4 minutes before the cooling jackets melt. If the core goes, we are just more junk for their shotgun." 4 minutes is plenty, Sylvan replied. He adjusted the pitch. "I am coming up on the Saturn booster. It is tumbling. I need you to prep the remote igniter for the hypergolic foam." "Sylvan, that foam is 40 years old. It is unstable. If I prime the tank and we take one more hit from the gravity shear, the Venture goes up with it." "Then do not let us take another hit," Sylvan said. He steered the tug closer to the massive hollow cylinder of the spent booster. It was a relic of an era when humans dreamed of the moon. Now it was just 100 tons of floating scrap. The white paint was pitted and scarred by decades of micrometeoroid impacts. The Venture's proximity sensors began to wail. A new sound joined the chorus. It was a rhythmic thumping. "That is the hull," Benton said. "The gravity is pulling the rivets. We are losing tension in the midsection." "Stay focused, Benton. Give me the remote link to the booster's reserve tanks." "Linking now. You should have it on your secondary HUD." Sylvan saw the data stream flicker to life. The booster still had 300 gallons of hypergolic foam trapped in its maneuvering baffles. It was a chemical cocktail designed to ignite on contact with an oxidizer. In the vacuum of space, it was a dormant volcano. Sylvan maneuvered the Venture until the tug's nose was only 20 feet from the booster's aft section. He used the mechanical grappling arms. The hydraulic fluid hissed in the lines. He felt the thud through the controls as the metal claws bit into the booster's skin. "Got it," Sylvan said. The Venture was now tethered to a bomb. The Drajul gravity well flared. The purple light outside the viewport intensified. The entire debris disk began to spin faster. It was a whirlpool of steel and glass, 3 miles wide. The center of the disk was glowing with the heat of friction. "The Drajul are tilting the beam," Sylvan observed. "They are preparing to fire. Benton, prime the foam." "Priming," Benton grunted. "I have to manually override the pressure valves. Hold us steady, Sylvan. If you jerk the ship, I will lose my grip on the manifold." Sylvan gripped the flight stick with both hands. His knuckles were white. He could see the Drajul cruiser's underside. It was a landscape of valleys and ridges, all matte black. There were no lights, no windows. It was a machine built by a race that did not care for aesthetics. A sudden jolt threw Sylvan against his harness. The Venture spun. The tethered booster acted like a pendulum, dragging the tug into a dangerous roll. "Sylvan, the shear just doubled," Benton yelled. The sound of a heavy tool falling and clattering against the deck echoed through the comms. I am pinned against the bulkhead. The G-force is climbing. Hang on! Sylvan shouted. He fought the roll. He fired the portside thrusters. The ship groaned. A warning light on the dash turned from yellow to a pulsing, angry red. Structural failure imminent. He looked at the debris disk. It was less than a mile away now. The gravity well was pulling the Venture and the booster toward the center of the shotgun. Benton, I need that foam primed now. We are being pulled into the focal point. I cannot reach the lever. Benton's voice was strained. He was gasping for air. The gravity, it is too heavy. Sylvan did not hesitate. He unbuckled his harness. The lack of gravity should have made him float, but the Drossel beam acted like a giant magnet. He was pulled toward the floor of the cockpit. He crawled toward the engineering access hatch. I am coming back, Sylvan said. He forced his way through the hatch. The air in the crawl space was hot and smelled of burnt rubber. He saw Benton. The older man was slumped against the primary coolant tank. His face was flushed. The gravity shear was pressing him down with the weight of 3 men. Sylvan reached the manual override. It was a heavy steel lever painted bright orange. He grabbed it. He felt the ship shudder as another piece of debris slammed into the Venture's outer hull. The sound was like a sledgehammer hitting a dumpster. Together, Benton, Sylvan said. He reached out and grabbed Benton's hand, placing it on the lever with his own. They pulled. The lever moved an inch, then 2. With a loud, metallic clack, it locked into place. On the overhead monitor, a green light flashed. Foam pressurized. Back to the seat, Sylvan commanded. We have 10 seconds before we hit the disk. They scrambled. Sylvan threw himself into the pilot's chair and slammed his hand onto the release for the grappling arms. Booster is away, Sylvan shouted. The Saturn stage drifted toward the heart of the debris whirlpool. It looked small against the backdrop of the alien cruiser. Sylvan grabbed the remote detonator. He waited. He watched the telemetry. The booster entered the high-pressure zone of the gravity well. The metal began to crumple. Now, Sylvan whispered. He pressed the button. The explosion was not a fireball. In the vacuum, it was a sudden, violent expansion of white foam and kinetic energy. The hypergolic mixture reacted with the residual oxygen in the booster's lines. The foam expanded 1,000 times its volume in a fraction of a second. It hit the gravity well like a handful of sand thrown into a turbine. The purple light flickered. The debris disk, once a perfect circle of lethal projectiles, began to wobble. The focal point of the Drossel beam shattered. It is working, Benton yelled. The disk is scattering. Thousands of tons of junk were flung outward in every direction. The shotgun had turned into a leaf blower. The debris was no longer a focused weapon. It was just a cloud of trash again. But the Venture was still in the middle of it. Sylvan, look out! A piece of a solar panel, traveling at 300 miles per hour, smashed through the top of the cockpit viewport. The reinforced glass shattered. The scream of escaping air filled the cabin. The air did not just leave the cockpit, it pulled. It was a physical hand grabbing Sylvan's lungs from the inside. The whistle was a high-frequency scream. It was the sound of life escaping into the void. Sylvan slammed his hand onto the emergency sealant release on the side of his console. Nothing happened. The circuit was dead. The solar panel fragment had sliced through the primary bus. Benton. Sealant. Now. Sylvan's voice was a strained rasp. He could feel the pressure in his inner ear spiking. His vision began to narrow at the edges. Benton was already moving. He was not fast, but he was efficient. He grabbed a canister of grade 4 industrial foam from the bulkhead rack. It was a heavy, yellow cylinder. He did not run. He lunged, using the shifting gravity to slide across the deck plates. The hole in the viewport was the size of a dinner plate. Jagged edges of polymer glass glittered like diamonds. Outside, the blackness of space looked hungry. The vacuum was a predator, and it had finally found a way in. Sylvan grabbed a heavy flight manual from the side pocket of his seat. It was a thick, plastic-bound binder. He jammed it against the hole. The vacuum sucked it tight against the frame. It was not a seal, it was a temporary dam. The whistling changed pitch. It became a low, guttural moan. "Hold it there!" Benton shouted. He was kneeling on the deck. He braced his heavy work boots against the base of the pilot's seat. He aimed the nozzle of the canister. The foam sprayed out in a thick, gray stream. It was a fast-curing thermal resin. It hit the edges of the flight manual and the shattered glass. It hissed. It bubbled. It looked like boiling lead. In 3 seconds, it hardened into a rigid, ugly mass. The whistling stopped. The silence in the cockpit was heavy. Sylvan breathed in. The air was thin, cold. It tasted like ozone and recycled sweat. He looked at the pressure gauge. 14.2 psi. It was dropping, but slowly. "The manual is holding," Benton said. He was breathing hard. His face was pale. "But that resin is not rated for a direct vacuum exposure of more than 20 minutes. It will turn brittle. It will crack under the thermal stress." Sylvan nodded. He wiped a smear of blood from his forehead. A small shard of glass had grazed him. He did not feel the pain yet. The adrenaline was too high. "Check the structural integrity of the frame," Sylvan said. He reached for his headset. It had fallen to the floor. He put it back on. "We need a permanent patch, a metal plate, and we need it before the Drazel realize we are still breathing." He looked out the side window. The debris cloud was a chaotic mess. The Drazel cruiser, the one the scanners identified as the Vesson, was rotating. It was slow, majestic, deadly. The massive gravity anchors on its hull were glowing a deep, angry violet. "They are recalibrating," Sylvan said. "They did not expect the foam to disrupt the focal point of their gravity well. They think it was a fluke, a malfunction in their own systems." "Let them think that," Benton grunted. He was rummaging through a floor locker. He pulled out a magnetic hull patch. It was a square of reinforced steel, 12 inches by 12. "I need you to depressurize the cabin again for a second. I cannot get the seal to seat from the inside against the remaining pressure." Sylvan looked at his friend. "You want to blow the air out on purpose?" "Only for 5 seconds," Benton said. He held up a small oxygen mask. "Put this on. I will do the same. When I give the signal, you hit the vent. I slap the plate on. The magnets will do the rest." It was a standard blue-collar fix. Dangerous, crude, effective. Sylvan took the mask. He strapped it over his face. He tasted the metallic tang of bottled oxygen. He watched Benton do the same. The older man gave a thumbs up. Sylvan gripped the manual vent lever. His hand was shaking slightly. It was not from fear. It was from the cold. The heaters were struggling to keep up with the heat loss through the patched hole. "Ready," Sylvan said. His voice was muffled by the mask. 3, 2, 1. Go. Sylvan pulled the lever. The remaining air in the cockpit vanished in a sudden, violent puff. Sylvan's vision blurred for a second. His skin felt tight. It felt like 1,000 needles were pricking his arms. The moisture on his tongue began to boil. Benton moved with the practiced grace of a man who had worked on the outside of a hull in a solar storm. He ripped the resin-covered manual away from the hole. He slammed the magnetic plate over the breach. Clang. The sound vibrated through the entire ship. The magnets were powerful. They bit into the steel frame of the viewport with a vengeance. Benton hammered the edges of the plate with the heel of his hand to ensure the gasket seated. He signaled with a sharp, downward motion. Sylvan slammed the vent shut. He hit the emergency oxygen dump. A hiss of fresh air filled the tiny cabin. The pressure gauge began to climb. 14.7. It stabilized. They both ripped off their masks. They sat there for a long minute, just breathing. The air was thick with the smell of the resin and the dry metallic scent of the emergency tanks. "Good hit," Sylvan said. "I hate this ship," Benton replied. He leaned his head against the bulkhead. "I really do." "Do not let her hear you say that," Sylvan said. He turned back to the controls. "We have bigger problems. Look at the long-range scanners." On the flickering monitor, the Drazel fleet was moving. They were not just recalibrating, they were repositioning. The three cruisers were forming a perfect equilateral triangle. It was a geometric cage. "They are not using the debris as a shotgun anymore," Benton whispered. He leaned over Sylvan's shoulder. "They are creating a localized singularity. They are going to crush everything in that sector into a single point of infinite mass." "Including us," Sylvan said. "Including the debris," Benton added. "If they do that, they will have a solid sphere of compressed metal, a moon-sized kinetic slug. They can drop that right onto the North American plate. It would be an extinction-level event. No radiation, no fallout. Just a hammer blow that breaks the crust." Sylvan looked at the readout. He saw the energy reading spiking. The Drazel were not playing games anymore. They were done being annoyed by a salvage tug. They were going for the kill. "We cannot stop a singularity," Benton said. His voice was flat, pragmatic. "No," Sylvan said. He began flipping switches. He was bypassing the safety limiters on the Venture's main thrusters. "But we can change the ingredients of their soup." "What are you thinking, Sylvan?" "The Drazel think this junk is just dead weight," Sylvan said. He pointed to a specific cluster of icons on the radar. They missed the old communications satellites, the ones from the late 20th century. "They still have nuclear thermal generators, plutonium-238. Benton's eyes widened. "There are 14 of them in that cluster. If we can push those satellites into the heart of their singularity before it collapses," Sylvan said, "we do not just give them a metal slug. We give them a dirty bomb the size of a city. The radiation would fry their gravity anchors. It would cause a feedback loop. The singularity would turn inside out." "Exactly," Sylvan said. He gripped the flight stick. "But we have to get there first. And we have to do it through a field of moving scrap metal while they are pulling on us with the force of a small sun." "I will go to the engine room," Benton said. He stood up. He did not look tired anymore. He looked like a man with a job to do. "I will give you every ounce of thrust this old girl has. Just do not miss." "I never miss, Benton," Sylvan said. As Benton disappeared into the crawl space, Sylvan felt the Venture groan. The ship was being pulled toward the center of the Drazel triangle. The gravity was increasing. Every bolt in the frame was screaming. He pushed the throttles forward. The engines roared. A deep, low-frequency vibration rattled his teeth. "Hold on, you old bucket of bolts," Sylvan whispered to the ship. "We are not done yet." The Venture surged forward. Ahead of them, the violet light of the Drazel trap began to glow with a blinding intensity. The hunt was on. The vibration was no longer just a sound. It was a physical presence that lived in Sylvan Mercer's marrow. Every plate of the Venture's hull seemed to be humming at a frequency that made his vision blur. On the main console, the artificial horizon line was dancing. The Drazel gravity anchors were pulling the ship toward the center of the three massive cruisers. It felt like being caught in the wake of a giant, invisible magnet. "Benton, the inertial dampeners are at 94% capacity," Sylvan shouted over the roar of the engines. "If they redline, we are going to be turned into a red smear against the back wall." "I am aware of the physics, Sylvan," Benton's voice came through the headset. It was strained. Sylvan could hear the heavy metallic clatter of a pneumatic wrench. "The cooling jacket on the main reactor is sweating. I have bypassed the thermal cutoffs. You have thrust, but do not expect a smooth ride. The engine is basically a controlled explosion right now. Sylvan looked out the viewport. The blender was tightening. Thousands of pieces of orbital debris, shards of titanium, frozen chunks of wastewater, and jagged sections of old rocket boosters were being drawn into a swirling vortex. At the center of the three Drajal ships, the space itself seemed to be puckering. A point of violet light pulsed there. It was the birth of the singularity. "I see the target cluster," Sylvan said. He adjusted the radar gain. 14 old communications satellites. They are tumbling in Sector 7G. They are caught in a counter-rotation. It is going to be a tight window. "How tight?" Benton asked. "If I miss by 5 meters, we hit the debris wall and turn into confetti," Sylvan replied. He shifted his grip on the flight stick. The controls felt sluggish, heavy with the weight of the gravity well. "I need you to vent the emergency oxygen into the secondary thrusters. I need the extra kick for the lateral shift." "That is our breathing air, Sylvan," Benton said. There was a brief pause. "Doing it now. You have 30 seconds of boosted maneuverability. Use them wisely." Sylvan watched the gauges. A hiss of pressurized gas echoed through the frame of the tug. The Venture lurched to the left. Sylvan fought the stick, guiding the ship through a gap between a defunct weather station and a cloud of spinning copper wire. The wire whipped against the hull, sounding like 1,000 needles hitting a tin roof. The 14 satellites loomed ahead. They were cylinders of dull gold foil and blackened lead. To any other observer, they were junk. To Sylvan, they were 14 pellets of plutonium-238. "I am deploying the magnetic harpoon," Sylvan said. He toggled a switch on the overhead panel. A heavy clunk vibrated through the floorboards. The harpoon, a specialized tool designed for snagging rogue satellites, shot out from the Venture's nose. It was trailing a high-tensile carbon fiber cable. The first satellite was hit square in its main bus. The magnetic head locked on. Sylvan didn't wait. He swung the ship in a wide arc, using the momentum to clothesline the other 13 satellites in the cluster. It was a maneuver he had practiced 1,000 times in the salvage yards of the moon. "Got them," Sylvan grunted. The weight of the satellites jerked the ship. The Venture groaned. A warning light flickered on the dash. Structural stress. Hull shear imminent. "Sylvan, the gravity well is collapsing," Benton yelled. "The Drajal are accelerating the compression. The singularity is going to go critical in 2 minutes. We are being pulled in." "I feel it," Sylvan said. His teeth were clenched so hard his jaw ached. The G-force was pushing him back into his seat. The violet light outside was now a blinding glare. The 3 Drajal cruisers were motionless, indifferent to the small human ships struggling in their trap. To the Drajal, the Venture was just more debris to be crushed into the kinetic slug. "Benton, I need everything. Give me the overload." "If I dump the core stabilizers, the reactor will melt in 60 seconds, Benton warned. "If you don't, we are dead in 30, Sylvan countered. "Copy that. Initiating core dump. Hold on to your soul, Sylvan." The engine roar changed from a deep thrum to a high-pitched scream. The Venture surged. The ship wasn't flying anymore. It was a projectile. Sylvan steered the tug straight toward the violet heart of the singularity. He wasn't trying to escape it. He was aiming for it. The satellites trailed behind the Venture like a tail on a comet. The intense gravity was already beginning to peel the gold foil off their frames. The plutonium cores inside were becoming unstable under the pressure. "Distance to center, 500 meters, Sylvan called out. His vision was narrowing. The edges of his sight were turning black. 400, 300. "Release the cable," Benton screamed. Sylvan slammed his fist onto the emergency release. The carbon fiber cable snapped back with the force of a whip, lashing against the Venture's hull and leaving a deep gouge in the metal. The 14 nuclear satellites, freed from the tug, were instantly sucked into the center of the Drajul singularity. "Now! Hard bank right!" Sylvan roared. He shoved the flight stick to the stop and kicked the rudder pedal. The Venture groaned as it fought the massive gravitational pull. The ship's frame twisted. A window in the rear galley shattered, the sound of exploding glass muffled by the vacuum. For a heartbeat, Sylvan thought they wouldn't make it. The ship seemed to hover on the edge of the violet abyss. Then, the ingredients hit the pot. The 14 RTGs reached the center of the singularity. The Drajul gravity anchors were designed to compress solid matter, but they weren't calibrated for the sudden injection of 14 concentrated radioactive cores undergoing rapid, forced fission. The reaction was instantaneous. The violet light didn't just brighten. It turned a searing, jagged white. A massive electromagnetic pulse rippled outward. Sylvan felt the electronics in the cockpit die. The monitors went black. The lights flickered and failed. The Venture was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. Sylvan was thrown against his harness, the straps cutting into his shoulders. "The gravity anchors." Benton's voice was a faint rasp through the dead headset. "They are feeding back." The Drajul lost control. Through the viewport, Sylvan saw the impossible. The singularity, instead of collapsing inward, began to expand in a chaotic, irregular shape. The Drajul cruisers, caught in their own failing trap, began to tilt. Their massive, matte black hulls were being dragged toward each other. The feedback loop was turning the gravity wells into a grinder. The very force the aliens had used to enslave the Earth's debris was now tearing their own ships apart. Sylvan gripped the dead flight stick. The Venture was drifting, its engines silent, its power gone. They were floating in the middle of a cosmic car wreck. "Benton," Sylvan whispered. The cockpit was cold. The only sound was the ticking of cooling metal. "I am here," Benton replied, his voice coming from the darkness of the crawl space. "I am alive, but the engine is a melted lump of slag. We are dead in the water, Sylvan." Sylvan looked out at the Drajul fleet. One of the cruisers was breaking in half, its spine snapped by the fluctuating gravity. "We might be drifting," Sylvan said, "but we are not the ones who are breaking." The Venture floated in the silence of the graveyard, a small battered piece of junk that had just broken the back of an empire. But the momentum was still carrying them, and the Drajul were not all dead yet. The cockpit of the Venture was 32 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Sylvan Mercer could see his breath. Each exhale was a thin, white ghost that vanished into the shadows of the dead instrument panel. The master alarm had finally died, along with the main battery. The silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that usually preceded a funeral. Sylvan reached into the side pocket of his flight suit and pulled out a chemical light stick. He snapped it. A harsh, neon-green glow filled the cramped space. The shadows retreated, revealing the jagged cracks in the viewport and the frost forming on the edges of the consoles. "Benton!" Sylvan called out. His voice was a dry rasp. He didn't use the comms. He shouted through the open hatch leading to the engineering crawlspace. Status on the auxiliary bus. A series of heavy, rhythmic thuds echoed from the belly of the ship. It was the sound of a man hitting something very hard with a very heavy hammer. "The bus is a slag heap, Sylvan." Benton's voice drifted up, muffled by layers of lead-lined insulation. "I am bypassing the primary relays with a set of jumper cables and a prayer. Give me 2 minutes. Or 10. Time is a bit abstract back here right now." Sylvan looked out the viewport. The view was a nightmare of physics. The Drajul fleet was no longer a disciplined line of conquerors. The flagship, a massive monolith named the Ulron, was listing 45 degrees to the galactic plane. Its gravity anchors were malfunctioning. Instead of a steady, controlled pull, the anchors were pulsing in erratic, violent bursts. The 14 radioactive thermal generators they had dumped into the singularity had done more than just disrupt the field. They had poisoned the well. The Drasal technology was precise. It relied on a clean gravitational signature. The injection of chaotic, high-energy fission fragments had turned their own weapon into a blender. "They are trying to purge the core," Sylvan whispered to himself. He watched as the Ulron opened its primary ventral vents. A stream of glowing violet gas hissed out into the vacuum. The aliens were trying to reset their gravity drive. If they succeeded, they would regain control. They would stabilize their orbit, and then they would turn their kinetic weapons on the planet below out of pure, cold spite. Benton. "We have a problem," Sylvan yelled. "The flagship is venting. They are going to reboot." "Not on my watch," Benton growled. The engineer emerged from the crawl space, his face smeared with black grease and a streak of dried blood on his forehead. He was carrying a portable power pack and a length of heavy-duty copper wire. "I have enough juice for one burst, one mechanical action. What do you need?" Sylvan pointed out the window. "The winch. The main salvage winch is still loaded with the 3-ton tungsten counterweight from the last job. It is a dumb mechanical mass. No computers. No guidance." Benton looked at the Ulron. The alien ship was 3 miles away, but in the vacuum of space, that was a stone's throw for a kinetic projectile. "You want to use the winch as a sling?" "The Drasal ignored the junk," Sylvan said. He gripped the manual release lever. It was a cold iron handle. "They thought the debris was beneath them. I want to give them one last piece of Earth's history to remember us by." Benton didn't hesitate. He knelt by the floor plates and began stripping the ends of the copper wire with a pocket knife. "I can bypass the safety interlocks. I will feed the power directly into the winch motor. It will be a one-way trip for the motor. It will melt the moment it finishes the rotation." "Do it," Sylvan said. Sylvan grabbed the manual thruster control. It was a secondary system, powered by compressed nitrogen tanks. It was used for fine-tuning a docking approach. It was weak, but it didn't need the main engines. He felt the Venture shudder as he puffed the nitrogen jets. The ship began to rotate, slowly, agonizingly, until the nose was pointed directly at the Ulron's open ventral vent. "Ready!" Benton shouted. He held 2 bare wires inches apart. "On your mark, Sylvan." Sylvan watched the Ulron. The violet glow in its vents was intensifying. They were seconds away from a full restart. "Mark!" Benton slammed the wires together. A brilliant blue spark jumped between his hands, illuminating the engineering bay in a flash of ozone and heat. The winch motor didn't just turn, it screamed. The sound vibrated through the entire hull of the Venture, a low-frequency howl of tortured metal. The 3-ton tungsten block, tethered by a high-tensile carbon fiber line, swung in a massive arc around the ship's center of mass. Sylvan watched the tension gauge. The needle buried itself in the red. The ship groaned, the frame twisting under the sudden centrifugal force. "Now!" Sylvan roared. He slammed his fist onto the manual guillotine. A small explosive charge fired, driving a hardened steel blade through the carbon fiber cable. The tungsten block was released at the peak of the arc. It didn't have a rocket motor. It didn't have a guidance chip. It was just 3 tons of dead weight moving at 400 miles per hour. It crossed the distance in silence. The Drasal flagship never saw it coming. Their sensors were tuned for energy signatures, for missiles, and for high-velocity plasma. They weren't looking for a lump of metal. The tungsten block struck the Ulron directly inside the open ventral vent. The impact was not an explosion. It was a mechanical catastrophe. The block shattered the delicate gravity-focusing lenses inside the vent. It plowed through the secondary cooling lines and embedded itself deep in the ship's reactor shielding. The violet glow inside the Ulron changed instantly. It turned a sickly, bruised purple, then a blinding, frantic white. The feedback loop was total. Without the lenses to focus the gravity well, the ship's own mass began to collapse in on itself. The Ulron buckled, its 4-mile-long hull folded like a piece of tin foil in a giant's fist. The shockwave wasn't sound. It was a ripple in space-time that rattled Sylvan's teeth in his skull. The other 2 Drazel cruisers, seeing their flagship turn into a localized black hole, didn't wait to find out what happened next. They cut their gravity anchors, sacrificed their remaining debris shields, and engaged their long-range warp drives. In a flash of distorted light, they were gone. Silence returned to the venture. Sylvan sat back in his seat. His hands were shaking, but his grip was firm. He looked out at the debris field. The Ulron was gone, reduced to a dense sphere of crushed alloy no larger than a house. The rest of the junk, the old satellites, the spent rocket stages, the frozen trash of 60 years of human ambition, was beginning to drift again. It was no longer a weapon. It was just history. "Benton," Sylvan called out. "The power pack is dead." Benton's voice came back. He sounded tired. "And I think I burned my eyebrows off. But the air is still recycling." Sylvan looked down at the earth. The blue marble was still there, glowing in the light of a rising sun. The Drazel had come to clean the graveyard, but they hadn't realized that the ghosts were still protective of their home. "We are drifting, Benton," Sylvan said, a dry smile touching his lips. "But the trajectory is good. We will hit the upper atmosphere in about 6 hours." "Plenty of time to fix the radio," Benton replied. He let out a short, rough laugh. "I hope you have a good lawyer, Sylvan. We are going to get a massive fine for littering that alien ship all over the orbit." Sylvan closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. "Let them send the bill. I'll tell them to collect it from the Drazel." The venture drifted on, a battered salt-of-the-earth survivor in a sky that was finally quiet. The war was over, won not by superweapons or grand strategies, but by 2 men, a hammer, and a 3-ton piece of junk.